You know, many times when patients are confronted with their disease, they're kind of in a hurry to get on with the treatment. I've always advised patients, when the circumstances weren't urgent, to take time to understand their disease and to evaluate the alternatives.
Don't take the car wash approach to your care. You know, when we go to a car wash, we sit in the car and we just do what we're told. And in cancer care, I think that doesn't serve us well. I think to really be involved and understand what's happening with your cancer is so important.
I think that it's really important when a person is diagnosed with cancer that they take a deep breath. And you really need to look at what are all the treatment options. And that includes participating in research or a clinical trial. Now, sometimes your doctor may or may not offer you that, and you need to ask. You need to say, well, is there any research available on this topic? Are there any clinical trials open?
And I generally will try to explain what the status of their disease is, what the science tells us, what the standard of care is. If there is a clinical trial available that they're eligible for, I tell them about that trial and tell them you can get the standard of care that everybody in the country should be getting for this stage of disease. Or we can put you into the clinical trial.
The next step is to determine whether they're candidates for clinical trials. So I explain to them perhaps they're not a candidate, but that they're still going to receive very high quality cancer care. Or perhaps later in their treatment process, perhaps they might become a candidate for another clinical trial in the future.
When someone participates in a clinical trial, there's always a level of uncertainty. So you don't necessarily know how a treatment or a procedure is going to affect you. Is it going to have a positive impact, or might you have an adverse reaction to that treatment? And so you also need to understand that that's something to take into consideration. Is that a risk that you want to take? Some clinical trials are testing procedures or drugs or treatments that haven't been approved by the FDA yet for your particular type of cancer or your particular type of situation. You also want to think about some practical things, like the time involved in participating in a clinical trial. And does that pull you away from work or maybe your family?
There's a tendency with research studies to want to look at the patient just a little bit more carefully. So they may get more laboratory tests, they may get more X-ray and CAT scan-like tests if they're in the clinical trial.
Now, as a patient, I like these diagnostic tests. I like the fact that they're looking, and some people view it as inconvenience. I look at it as an important data gathering exercise.
You also want to think about the cost involved in participating in a clinical trial.
People who are going to enroll in a clinical trial need to think, will my insurance pay for any extra testing or extra screening that I might need? Or will the clinical trial actually pay for it?
Now, there could be other costs to the patient, such as childcare, transportation, and things like that, that they do need to think about, and sometimes that'll be the reason why they won't go on a clinical trial.
Again, those are real issues that do have to be considered, and everybody's situation is very different.
If someone goes to an oncologist and the oncologist does not participate in clinical trials, you might want to ask a few more questions about your treatment. You might want to get a second opinion.
I also offer them to see someone else that may be able to offer them a clinical trial if I don't have something available through my group.
If a patient is really interested in being in a clinical trial, they can go to clinicaltrials.gov. They'll show you all the clinical trials that are available for people in your situation and where they are and who's in charge of them and who to call.
And then if a patient is just overly anxious about participating in a clinical trial, I reassure them there's no obligation to participate in a clinical trial. I also explain to them that I, as their physician, will give them the same high-quality care whether they participate or not. What it's really about is for all of us to move forward together.